The vegetable that saved entire tribes from starvation was deliberately erased from American agriculture. And most people have never even heard its name. While we're obsessed with so-called superfoods flown in from distant continents, we've abandoned some of the most nutrient-dense crops that used to grow right in our own soil. So what happened to them? Most Americans have never heard of the sunroot. Yet these stubby little tubers once kept whole communities alive through harsh winters. Colonists called them Jerusalem artichokes. Problem is, they're neither from Jerusalem, nor have anything to do with artichokes. Classic case of terrible marketing. In fact, these underground gems taste like a cross between a potato and a water chestnut, with a satisfying nutty sweetness that made them irresistible for early settlers. What truly made the sunroot amazing, though, was its stubborn refusal to give up. Bad soil? No problem. Hard frost? Bring it on. Where other crops died, they thrived. But here's where it gets interesting. Sunroots are packed with iron and potassium, crucial in an era when scurvy and malnutrition stalked frontier families. Native Americans had been cultivating these tubers for centuries, storing them in root cellars where they'd stay fresh all winter long. You could eat them raw for that satisfying crunch, or roast them over a fire until sweet and tender. Raw sun chokes contain resistant starch, which feeds the good bacteria in your gut. Modern nutritionists are just catching up to what indigenous peoples knew all along. The weird thing is how completely they vanished from American tables. When potatoes arrived from South America, sunroots got pushed aside like yesterday's news. Potatoes were easier to cook, stored longer, and frankly had better PR. Today, most people walk past sunroots in specialty grocery stores without a second glance. They're $8 a pound, labeled as some kind of exotic superfood. Our ancestors would laugh. Then there's another forgotten tuber that required even more specialized knowledge to harvest safely. Most people think of poison when they hear toxic plant, but Native Americans along the eastern coast had a different approach. When they saw tuahu, or araro arum, they thought of dinner. Sure, it could kill you if eaten raw, but if prepared right, it was pure starchy gold. This marsh-dwelling tuber grew where other crops simply couldn't survive. Soggy wetlands, flooded areas, places that would drown normal vegetables. Tuahu thrived there like a happy duck. The plant basically laughed at farming challenges that stumped everyone else. Here's the thing about indigenous food knowledge, it wasn't just about finding calories. These folks figured out complex detoxification processes that would make modern chemists jealous. They'd roast the tubers for hours, sometimes even leaching them in running water for days. Talk about patience. Try explaining that timeline to someone waiting for their microwave burrito. But wait, there's more. The leaves weren't just decoration. They became nature's aluminum foil. Perfect for wrapping fish or other foods before steaming. Zero waste, maximum efficiency. Makes you wonder who the real innovators were. Sure, the preparation was labor-intensive, but the payoff was reliable nutrition when you needed it most. Tuahu provided steady carbohydrates during lean seasons, and it grew where nothing else would. Today, you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who even recognizes the OK arum, let alone knows how to safely prepare it. Most of that knowledge survives only in dusty historical records and the memories of elders. Speaking of forgotten foods that required serious survival skills, let's head west to the prairies, where another root vegetable earned its reputation as the snack of traveling tribes. Imagine a trail tough enough to survive bone-dry summer heat and freezing prairie winters. Enter prairie turnip. Nature's original energy bar. The plains tribes called it tipsala. And honestly, they had it figured out. This protein-packed root was more than just food, it was a portable survival tool. Think about it. You're on a 3-week buffalo hunt across endless grasslands. What do you take with you? Prairie turnips, dried and ready to go. Timing was everything. A summer dig meant backbreaking work under the scorching sun, but the reward was huge. Women would gather these thumb-sized roots, then slice them paper-thin. Once dried, they became rock-hard and could last for years. Years. Wish your modern granola bars were that reliable. But here's where it gets interesting. This wasn't just trail mix. Ground prairie turnip became the backbone of winter meals. And the nutrition was amazing. Fiber, vitamin C, manganese, everything you needed when fresh food was just a memory. What made this root special was its stubbornness. Other crops threw in the towel during droughts, but prairie turnip just shrugged and kept growing. The drier, the better. Then the plows came. Miles of prairie were overturned for corn and wheat. Cattle trampled the rest to dust. Suddenly, the prairie potato that used to feed entire civilizations had no place left to grow. Today, seeing one in the wild is a stroke of luck. Makes you wonder what we traded away. Convenience, right? Speaking of forgotten proteins that once fed whole communities, there's another root that took things to a whole new level. Groundnut might look like something you'd find in a nut mix, but this climbing vine produced tubers that could put a potato to shame. Native tribes called it the Indian potato, but that name only scratches the surface of what made the plant special. Here's where things get interesting. Regular potatoes give you a gentle pat on the back with mostly starch, but groundnut packs 3 times the protein. 3 times. That's more protein than most people get from expensive quinoa bowls today. The vine itself was very clever. No need for prime farmland or perfect soil. Nope. It would thrive along stream banks and woodland edges, climbing up trees and shrubs as if it owned the place. You'd find these tubers growing where other crops had given up. But the real genius was in how people used them. Tubers could be boiled until soft, roasted on coals for a nutty flavor, or mashed into stews for extra richness. Think of it as the original protein powder, except it actually tasted good and didn't cost $40 a jar. So why did we toss away this nutritional powerhouse? Potatoes came in and played the convenience card. Faster to cook, easier to store, and didn't require foraging along creeks. Sometimes laziness wins, even when it's not the better option. Groundnut quietly disappeared from American tables, taking its protein-rich secret with it. Makes you wonder what other nutritional treasures we abandoned for convenience. Speaking of forgotten greens, there's a plant that makes modern spinach look amateurish. You know those annoying weeds that take over your garden? Not joking. What we call lamb's quarters today once fed entire civilizations. This leafy green powerhouse puts modern spinach to shame. We're talking about a plant with more calcium than milk and enough vitamin A to make carrots jealous. Native Americans didn't stumble upon it by accident. They actively bred certain varieties for thousands of years. Here's the amazing part, lamb's quarters thrives exactly where you don't want it. Ruined soil. Perfect. Terrible drainage. No problem. Your grandma's compost heap. Practically a 5-star restaurant for this thing. But the real genius was that the leaves weren't just eaten fresh in spring. Indigenous communities figured out how to dry these greens for winter storage, creating a nutritional insurance policy once snow covered everything. Grind the seeds and you'd get a protein-rich flour that would last through hungry months. And here's the clever bit, the whole plant was basically a supermarket. Young leaves went into soups. Mature leaves got cooked like spinach. Seeds became bread flour. Even the stems could be eaten when tender. The irony stings, doesn't it? We toss out one of nature's most complete foods while spending fortunes on superfood powders. Lamb's quarters literally grows for free in most backyards, needs zero care, and would make any dietitian cry tears of joy. Yet today, farmers spray millions of dollars worth of herbicide to kill what once kept people alive and healthy. Makes you wonder about other weeds we're missing. Speaking of plants we completely misunderstood, just wait until you hear about a root that could fix what ails you. When you think of old-school pharmacies meeting the dinner table, Indian celery was a double opportunity. But this wasn't your typical supermarket celery. We're talking about a member of the wild carrot family that could nourish you and heal you at the same time. Native communities in the western regions knew exactly what they had. Roots were pulled from the earth and eaten raw and crisp. Or tossed onto the fire to roast out that deep, earthy flavor that makes ordinary vegetables seem dull. But here's where it gets interesting. Young leaves and stems weren't just decorative. People turned them into greens with serious nutritional value. Think of it as nature's multivitamin, growing wild without any help from humans. The medicinal side. That's where things got really smart. If someone in the community struggled with chest colds or respiratory trouble, Indian celery roots would be prepared especially for respiratory relief. Nasty wound that wouldn't heal? Same plant, different treatment. Makes sense, doesn't it? Why grow 10 different plants if one can do a bunch of jobs? The problem started when people got a little too enthusiastic with harvesting. As more folks discovered just how helpful it was, wild populations started to decline. Then the land development boom began, wiping out vast areas of Indian celery's natural habitat. These days, finding wild Indian celery takes some serious detective work. But speaking of plants that require detective work just to eat safely, there's one more forgotten green that's worth the risk. Spring arrived in colonial America like a cruel joke. Families survived another brutal winter by scraping together stored corn and whatever scraps they could find. Then Mother Nature laid salvation right at their feet. The problem was, if they messed it up, salvation could kill them. That's where red poke, or as folks called it back then, poke salad, came in. This stuff grows all over the eastern woodlands, sending up long purple shoots that practically shout, "Eat me," at desperate families. But here's where things get truly dangerous. Young poke shoots are packed with the vitamins A and C winter-weary bodies crave, plus trace minerals. Think of it as nature's multivitamin, with a deadly catch. The mature plant is pure poison. The roots, berries, older leaves, every bit could put you in the ground. So how did people not drop dead all over the place? Generational cultural knowledge, passed down like family recipes. Grandmothers taught daughters exactly which shoots to pick, when to gather them, and most importantly, how to properly cook them. You had to boil those young greens twice, dumping the water each time to leach out toxins. The whole ritual became a springtime rite of passage. Families would head into the woods together, hunting for those delicate purple shoots rising from the forest floor. Kids learned how to spot the safe ones, while adults swapped tales about Cousin Jimmy, who ignored the poke rules and spent 3 days wishing he hadn't. It wasn't just about nutrition. It was survival knowledge coded into tradition. Makes you wonder what other secrets are hidden in those family recipes. Speaking of hidden treasures, wait until you hear what the first Americans discovered growing wild in sunny prairies. Wild sunflowers towered like skyscrapers above the grasslands. But here's the thing. Nobody back then ate the seeds. Nope. The real treasure was right in front of you. Those thick green stalks and full flower buds. Before anyone figured out how to grow those massive seed heads we know today, Native Americans ate something very different. They harvested tender shoots in early spring and summer, also plucking unopened flower buds just before they bloomed. What did they taste like? Think asparagus crossed with artichoke hearts. Sounds nice, doesn't it? These sunflower joints had a sweet, nutty flavor that made the effort worth it. And believe me, anything tasting like artichokes, without the Mediterranean price tag, is a win. Preparation was simple too. Roast them over coals or steam in earth ovens. No complex processing, no worries about toxic compounds. Catch them young enough and the stalks stayed tender. Those flower buds were little green treasures packed with vitamins. But here's where it gets interesting. These wild varieties thrived everywhere. Sunny prairies, ruined soils, even in fertile patches where other crops gave up. No maintenance needed. They grew on their own. Then agriculture got smarter. Growers started focusing on bigger seeds, better oil content, and huge flower heads. Makes sense commercially, but we completely forgot about eating the rest of the plant. Now most gardeners just stare at sunflower stalks wondering what to do with all that green waste. Meanwhile, in health-conscious circles, another forgotten crop quietly returns. Want to know what fed ancient warriors and marathon runners? Amaranth. This tiny grain contains more protein than most grains and enough calcium to keep your bones singing. The Aztecs called it the everlasting flower. And no joke, they weren't exaggerating. Picture a plant laughing at drought. Corn wilts, wheat dies out, yet amaranth keeps cranking out those small nutty seeds like it's having the best time of its life. Bad soil? No problem. Blazing sun? Bring it on. This plant grows where others go to die. But here's the kicker. You can eat the whole thing. Young leaves like the cold cousin of spinach, packed with iron that would make Popeye blush. Grind the golden seeds into flour, pop them like tiny popcorn, or toss them into soups for a satisfying crunch. Native Americans knew exactly what they had. At the end of summer, they'd harvest those stunning red and gold seed heads and store enough protein-rich grain to last through winter. Considering amaranth contains all 9 essential amino acids, that was a smart move. Makes sense, right? Then came the big grain takeover. Wheat forced its way onto every dinner plate and amaranth got shoved into a curious corner of health food stores. It's sad. A drought-resistant superfood traded for crops that need constant care. The funny thing is, fancy restaurants now charge $15 for amaranth bowls and call them ancient grains. Well, at least someone finally realized we threw away something truly awesome. Speaking of cold-shouldered miraculous plants, there's a grass that produces a nutrient-dense grain and around which entire civilizations built their lives. Picture yourself gliding in a birch bark canoe surrounded by tall grasses in shallow water in northern Minnesota. This grass is about to change everything you know about wild rice and American grains. Wild rice isn't actually rice. It's a grass that grows chest-high in pristine lakes around the Great Lakes region. The Ojibwe people called it manomin, which means, good berry, and for good reason. These dark, nutty grains pack more protein than corn, wheat, or true rice. Plus, they supply serious amounts of fiber, B vitamins, and minerals, everything communities needed to thrive through harsh winters. But here's where it gets interesting. You couldn't just walk into a field and harvest this stuff. Wild rice required a whole production system. Families would paddle canoes in late summer, laying tall grasses over their boats and gently beating the seeds loose with wooden sticks. It took skill, patience, and crystal-clear water conditions. And here's the biggest point, wild rice is the queen of grains. It only grows in clean, shallow lakes with just the right water levels. Too much pollution. Gone. Drain wetlands for farmland. History. Build dams to change river flow. You wipe out generations of food security. When European settlers arrived with drainage projects and industrial farming, the decline was sharp. Thousands of acres of wetlands disappeared overnight. Today, real wild rice is worth a fortune in health food stores, if you can find it. Most so-called wild rice is actually farmed in clumps and lacks the complex nutty flavor of true wild rice. Speaking of forgotten flavors, wait until you hear about a fruit that tastes like a tropical vacation but grows right in your own backyard. In the southeastern United States, there's a native vine producing a local fruit with a taste you've probably never heard of. Maypop, growing wild along Alabama fences, looks more like something found in a tropical rainforest than a garden center. This passionflower vine sports purple and white flowers that would make any nursery jealous. But its true treasure showed up later in the season, egg-sized fruits that early settlers called a backyard tropical delight. Here's the kicker, every serving had more vitamin C than most citrus fruits. The flavor? A mix of banana and pineapple with just enough tartness to keep things interesting. Native communities didn't just eat the fruit. They brewed calming teas from the leaves and used the flowers for everything from headaches to anxiety. The vine itself was nearly indestructible. Drought? No problem. Poor soil? Even better. It spread to forest edges and abandoned farmland like nature's own delivery service. One plant could produce dozens of fruits every season, and its roots came back year after year. But here's where things start to get frustrating. As exotic imports flooded American markets, people forgot about their backyard treasures. Why bother with maypop when you could buy pineapple from Hawaii? The real tragedy wasn't losing a tasty fruit, it was losing the knowledge of how every part of the plant could be used for food and medicine. Speaking of lost plant knowledge, wait until you meet the only native North American plant that could compete with your morning coffee. There's an important point about caffeine. Americans will go to almost any length to meet their daily caffeine needs. Coffee shops on every corner, energy drinks that could power a small town, and imported teas costing more than rent for some people. But what if, before all this madness, Native Americans had a perfect caffeine source growing right in their own backyards? Meet Yupon holly, the only native North American plant naturally containing caffeine. While Europeans traveled halfway around the world fighting wars for tea leaves, southeastern tribes have been brewing this tea for centuries. The leaves deliver a caffeine punch without that annoying afternoon crash that makes you feel like a train wreck. Southeastern tribes would roast the leaves until dark, then brew what they called black drink. But this wasn't your everyday morning coffee. It played a starring role in purification ceremonies and important tribal meetings. But here's what makes it fascinating. This sacred plant is nearly indestructible. Drought? No problem. Sandy soil that kills everything else? Perfect. Hurricanes? It keeps growing. Then came colonization. And somehow Americans decided that shipping tea from thousands of miles away was more sensible than using the caffeine-loaded shrub in their own backyard. Makes perfect sense, right? The wild Yupon still grows in the southeast, waiting for someone to remember its value. While we spend fortunes on imported energy, the answer is literally growing wild in half the country. Speaking of forgotten fruits growing wild in American backyards, there's a fruit that tastes like a tropical vacation but most people walk past every day. Walk through any American forest in late summer and you might catch the suspicious smell of something like banana bread. Follow your nose, and you'd find papaya trees laden with soft, green, egg-sized fruits tasting like a blend of banana pudding and mango. These weren't exotic imports. Papayas were America's largest native fruit, feeding tribes from Georgia to Michigan. Native tribes planned their late summer gatherings around papaya harvests, and the early settlers called them poor man's banana. But honestly, they taste better than most bananas you find in stores today. Here's the catch. Papayas contain more vitamin C than oranges, plus plenty of magnesium and potassium. Just one fruit meets about a third of your daily vitamin C needs. Not bad for something growing wild in shady riverbeds where other fruit trees have given up. But papayas are picky little divas. They only ripen for maybe 2 weeks in September, then they're done. The fruits turn to mush a few days after picking, making shipping impossible. Try to store them longer than a weekend and you'll have expensive compost. This delicate shelf life crushed their commercial future. There's also habitat loss. Papayas love the rich, moist lowlands we've drained and developed for 2 centuries. Surviving trees are usually pruned as shrubs. Speaking of plants with timing problems and storage issues, there's another forgotten fruit. Ever found yourself staring at overpriced tomatillos at a farmer's market, thinking there has to be a better way? Your ancestors figured this out centuries ago. Ground cherries grew wild all over America like nature's candy store. These golden jewels come wrapped in their own paper lantern-like husks, making them original grab-and-go snacks. No plastic packaging required. The flavor? Imagine sweet and tart mingling with a hint of pineapple. Loads of vitamin C that would make an orange jealous. And here's the thing. Modern crops shun hillsides, but ground cherries thrived in terrible soil. Native communities knew exactly when to harvest these little gems. Late summer brought bushes loaded with fruit, each protected by its papery husk like a natural gift box. Kids could wander through fields popping them like candy. Adults got creative too. They dried ground cherries for winter stores or turned them into leathery strips. Others made sauces that lasted months or even fermented them into drinks stronger than an average happy hour special. But here's where things start to get frustrating. Modern agriculture took one look at dried ground cherries and said, no, why? Shelf life. These beauties don't stay fresh or sit nicely on shelves for weeks like their industrial cousins. They want to be eaten fresh or stored quickly. So we sacrificed flavor and nutrition for convenience. Smart move, right? Speaking of plants that thrive where others die, there's another forgotten food from the eastern forests that made surviving winter possible. Back then, spring hunger was brutal. Winter stores ran low, nothing was growing yet, and your stomach was growling like an angry bear. But if you knew where to look in the eastern forests, small treasures waited just beneath the forest floor. Indian potato wasn't really a potato at all. These marble-sized tubers came from the spring beauty plant and packed more punch in every bite than you'd expect. Sweet, crunchy, and loaded with vitamin C right when scurvy threatened to knock you down. Native communities knew exactly when to dig them up. Too early, and they were bitter. Too late, and they turned woody. The crazy part? They grew everywhere. Moist forests from Canada all the way down to Georgia, blanketing the forest floor with delicate white flowers. You could eat them raw like tiny radishes or roast them over the fire for a few minutes. Either way, they delivered that first fresh bite of spring when everything still felt dead. Here's where it gets interesting. These little tubers weren't worth a dime. So you either ate them fresh, or you never ate them at all. No storage, no drying, no saving for later. Just pure seasonal eating at its finest. Kids learned to spot heart-shaped leaves and delicate flowers, turning food gathering into a family treasure hunt. Today, most people walk right past them in their own backyards. Spring beauties still pop up every year, but we don't notice them rushing to the market. We labeled them weeds, nothing more than garden trash to be cut down without a thought. But there's one more forgotten grain that fed entire prairie communities, and its story might surprise you even more. Meet little barley. Long before anyone heard of Wonder Bread, little barley saved whole communities. This scrappy wild grain grew waist-high in Midwest prairies and looked nothing like the fancy barley in your beer. But don't let its size fool you. Native peoples found a smart trick: plant it late in fall, and by the time everyone's waiting for corn to mature in early summer, you'd already have grain ready to harvest. Perfect timing. While other crops hadn't even sprouted, little barley filled stomachs and turned into flour. The grain itself was seriously nutritious. Packed with fiber and selenium, a mineral most people today don't even know they need. Cook it into porridge or bread, and it had a nutty, satisfying flavor. Maybe it wasn't gourmet, but it was reliable as sunrise. And here's the brilliant part. Little barley thrived where big grains struggled. Drought? No problem. Poor soil? Even better. It actually preferred harsh conditions that would kill pampered crops. Looking at prairie life, it makes sense. Whatever nature threw at you, you needed a food that could survive. But here's where the story gets frustrating. While European wheat and modern barley varieties swept across America, little barley got tossed aside like yesterday's paper. Farmers wanted higher yields, faster harvests, and fields that looked impressive. Now this ancient grain mostly survives in forgotten prairie patches, still growing wild while we import barley from the other side of the world. Sometimes old ways knew something we forgot. Speaking of forgotten wisdom, hear what we lost along the way. If you liked my video, and want to see more,